course, President George Herbert Walker Bush and his son would use the term "Don't mess with Texas." This was one of their informal campaign slogans, and there's a reason they would say that. It's become one of the most reliably Republican states in presidential elections, just as reliable as New York and California have become for Democrats in presidential elections. McCain won Texas by double digits in 2008. Bush won by over 20 points in 2000 and 2004. Anybody here willing to take a guess at the last Democratic candidate to actually win in Texas? Jimmy Carter, 1976. So it's been a while that these states have been in play, decades, whether it's a reliable Republican state like Texas has become, or California and New York as well. And the same Republican advantage could be said for most of the Deep South, the Mountain West, Central Plains. Democrats are feeling increasingly comfortable in the Northeast and Pacific Coast states. And all in all, regional trends in voting have isolated a handful of states that have been in play in recent elections, states we could conceive of as battleground or swing states. And indeed, going back to the subtitle of the book, Winning the White House 2004, region by region, vote by vote. And it really is driven by the assumption that the election would essentially come down to a few battleground states. And when we prepared the proposal, we were very confident that's the way it would be, because this has become sort of the defining feature of the Electoral College. I personally focused on the Midwest and West regions, what were considered the two most competitive regions actually in 2004 and had been in recent elections. In 2004, the Midwest had competitive races in Ohio, Missouri, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, and the West had potential battles in Colorado and Nevada. But outside of these states, there was little else to talk about, with, say, the exception of Florida, which really actually wasn't all that competitive in 2004, although it had been in 2000. Pennsylvania was another one, which was pretty competitive 2004. It turned out it wasn't all that competitive in 2008. And so if you just looked at 2000 and 2004, Republicans and Democrats could both count on 150 approximately electoral votes each, and thus focus their full attention on the few competitive states necessary to win the Electoral College total of 270. And in 2008, despite all of the historic dimensions that were involved, the state of the economy, the views of the Bush administration, it started out about the same. Whatever Obama did, he wasn't going to break through in certain Republican states, and whatever McCain did, he was going to have a very difficult time making a dent in what have become more reliable Democratic states. And so in a winner-takes-all plurality system, there's no prize for second place. And reducing a 10-point margin to 1 point counts for a little more than a moral victory when the objective is to win the Electoral College count. So the vast majority of candidate time, effort, and money are poured into about 1/4 of the United States of America. And here in New York State, our glimpses of candidates during the heat of the general election are often relegated to campaign visits in neighboring Erie or Cleveland. And our state is just often overlooked as dependably Democratic at this point. In fact, I was kind of shocked and surprised to see campaign ads in New York State. Obama had spent a lot of money trying to blanket the nationwide campaign, and actually was advertised in New York State. And this is one of the first times since I've been here, if I'm not watching Erie's news channel, that I've seen advertisements targeting New York State as part of a nationwide campaign. 99% of the campaign advertising money, however, in the 2004 presidential election was spent in just 17 states. And 92% of the campaign visits were in only 16 states. About 3/4 of advertising the last month of 2004 was spent in just 5 states. And candidates spent nothing in 23 states. So this presents a bit of a dilemma for me, not just as a citizen and a voter, but as an educator, and more specifically as a political science professor. I teach courses on elections and public opinion and political participation, civic education, and civic engagement. And I encourage students to get out there and exercise their voice through various forms in a representative democracy, including the right to vote. And in this election, they were very energized. In the last election, they were very energized. But I also realize that many of our students in New York feel their vote is somehow less meaningful and impactful in an electoral college system that skews the real electoral contest to about 10 states in any given year, and one in which New York has not been part of the fold, as I mentioned, for some time. And there's an impact. Turnout is higher in these swing states, particularly for first-time voters. They get this. Whatever they understand about the Electoral College, they understand these basic mechanisms of how it works, and for younger voters looking to go out and exercise their right to vote. And this brings us to 2000. While many people thought the 2000 election would show just how important every vote can be, for a lot of people it showed just how important every vote can be in certain states, but not necessarily the entire United States. And in one of the most heated elections in decades, in 2004, you saw this playing out. Turnout in competitive states increased from 54 to 63% over that 4-year period, but the less competitive states, it just increased from 51 to 53%. So that's essentially a 10-point difference between the perceived swing states and battlegrounds and the less competitive states. So these are central concerns that lead us to consider whether it's time to move beyond the Electoral College to a national popular vote. And of course, there's been many attempts to reform, if not abolish, the Electoral College process through constitutional amendment. But as I explained to my classes, it's not an easy feat to amend the Constitution. There's only been 17 amendments beyond the Bill of Rights in the past 200 years. The last amendment, any guesses when the last amendment was? Or 1992. And the one before that? 1971, which actually provided the right to vote to these 18-year-olds then. So we've had essentially 2 constitutional amendments over the last few decades. And so it's not an easy feat. It's not an easy thing to accomplish. And no amendment that speaks significantly to the Electoral College since the 12th has even made it out of Congress, which, you know, once you get out of Congress, you'd also have to run the gauntlet of winning 3/4 of state legislatures or pulling together a constitutional convention, which happened one time to repeal prohibition. So this is something that doesn't necessarily happen often, but the Constitution does provide another path to reform. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, and it reads, "Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors." And the states have actually done just that at times. There's nothing written in the Constitution that electors must be awarded in a winner-takes-all system. The now prevailing winner-takes-all rule actually was only used in 3 states when the Founding Fathers went back to their states to organize the nation's first presidential election. It was what we call a district system, predominantly, in which presidential candidates win the 2 electoral votes for winning the state based on Senate representation, and then House district by House district. But a winner-takes-all system became prominent in the pre-Civil War era as certain states made the switch. And as they made the switch, they increased their relative power over the other states because now they would have more electoral votes per state, and it evolved as a matter of political expediency in the mid-19th century. And once a state had moved to that system, unless other states were willing to move back, there was really little incentive for them to do so because their relative power then would decrease in terms of the impact they would have on the Electoral College total. And here's an example. The district system was used in Michigan for the 1892 presidential election, but they immediately repealed it. Now we have 2 states. Can you know the 2 states that still use this system, the district system? Nebraska's one.
Maine?
And Maine, that's right, Maine and Nebraska. Now there's not a lot of electoral votes at stake there. You know, fewer than the fingers on my hand here, but those are 2 states that have actually utilized this system. Maine enacted its congressional district system in 1969, and Nebraska did so in 1992. But neither state has ever determined the Electoral College based on split decisions across their districts. And so this has been one mechanism that has been a potential thought for reforming the Electoral College state by state and encouraging more attention to states like New York, California, and Texas. But only Colorado has actually moved recently on such an idea when the district system was actually on the ballot as part of the 2004 presidential election. Now, if such a system had been in place in 2000, Al Gore would have been president. He would have won the election because he had won some of those districts, say around Boulder or Denver. And remember, George Bush gets over the top by 2 votes, essentially, 270, 271, and Al Gore could have conceivably won those in Colorado.